So what I've done is kind of smacked this ball here in the center, and you see it's wobbling. That's because it's off-centered. It's not been put in its right position yet. I get a little bit of water in my hands just for lubricant, and I press down with my upper body. I use this hand to actually press flat, and I'm using it, cupping this hand in to press it in and down at the same time. All of this is doing is holding it still, essentially. And when I've held it long enough, with its wheel spinning, you can see now it's not wobbling. It's made something of a tuna can design, which is where I prefer to start. Some people have different shapes they prefer, but this is where I find it works pretty well. If I'm making something extremely large and tall, especially if I want it narrow as well, I will start with more of a soup can where it's tall and narrow. But this works relatively well. I try and get it relatively close to the size I want the base to be, because once you get the base there, manipulating it too much will just cause problems along the way. So I've got about the width I want. What I do is I find the center and I press down with my finger. If I had more ability to maneuver, I'd show you, but I'm pressing down and I'm leaving about I like to leave a little over 1/4 of an inch from the bottom, sometimes even more than that, because I like to trim the feet of my pot, which I'll show in another demo how that's done and what that means. But essentially I try and decorate a little bit on the bottom, so I need it thicker when I first make it. So I've gone in, I gauge by eyeball. However, you can go in with a tool like this little guy. It's a little findling knife decoration or tool, and I press down, put my finger at the point where it went in, and you can see it's about that deep. So I can go just a little bit more. Here we go. Now, what I'm going to do is widen out that hole a little bit. So I take my fingers together, thumbs, and I actually just pull my thumbs apart, trying to keep that bottom relatively flat. Let me see if I can kind of show you. I apologize. Maybe. There you go. You can kind of see the bottom is now, it's wider and it's flat. Try and get back at the right angle. There we go. And what I want to really do is go in. And a uneven bottom is just not comfortable to drink or eat, or more importantly, to wash. So what I want to do, not that this is going to be a food or utility vase, but you know, occasionally you want to rinse out your flower pot. And if you were to have it too uneven, it becomes problematic. Actually, bacteria and mold and things can grow in uneven bottoms if it's not glazed properly. But more importantly, if I haven't compressed it properly, it'll create what's called an S-crack, which is essentially a crack that forms when firing, and it makes often the shape of an S, but it's because there's not enough compression there in the bottom. So I'm going to take this tool, which is a wooden rib. Well, it looks like a rib made of wood, not that hard to figure out why they call it that. And I press down. It does multiple things. One is compress. The other is it goes in and it pulls up all the excess and overly soft clay, and it works kind of like a squeegee and pulls off anything I don't want in there. So again, I'm going to do another little trip. I apologize. And you can see it's much cleaner now. No ridges. Nice, smooth walls and bottom. Here we go. And here's where the magic happens. You notice I sit here and clean my fingers. I'm not OCD by any means, but I find for me, again, I'm not a very wet thrower, so I try and keep all the goop off my fingers. I add a little bit of water, just maybe 6 or 7 drops, squeeze out the rest, and I have my sponge. And then I'm just going to do my first pull, which kind of evens out the walls. start going up. Okay. And then now I'm going to add just a touch of water inside, so I have that nice lubricant on my fingers. And now I'm going for the actual height of my pot. First two I was kind of trying to get my walls the right consistency and the right thickness. Now I want to add height, but at the same time, because my fingers are so wide, I don't want to actually make it too wide at the top. Because making it too wide at the top, especially if I go fast, can flare out my pot and weaken the walls. So this will probably be the last one I pull for height. Notice I'm still trying to keep it relatively narrow. Because with these vases, I don't want the bottom very wide. And if I make any one part extremely wide right now, it's going to get that weak structure at the bottom, will cause problems. So I'm just going to, now I've got my height, going in, making sure everything's nice and even. Same thickness all the way through. A thick bottom walls at the bottom would make it bottom heavy. It would also cause potential problems along the lines of drying. It would dry slower on the bottom, which sometimes is something you want, but not because of that. So I have nice consistent walls now. Now before I start enclosing this, because this still has a nice flat top, I'm going to take that wooden rib tool again. And if you look down here, and this is just my preference, some people do this later, you have a little bit of a lip here where you can see where I just, it's this natural progression from the clay. I'm going to go in with this wooden rib tool and go ahead and trim that off. And the reason I do that is it also gives me a chance to kind of smooth off some of the surfaces, get a better silhouette, and see what I'm really working with. And then now I'm ready to actually start enclosing and building shoulders, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the shoulders of the pot. So I'm going to pull a little more clay from the top, but this time I'm going in with it a little bit and flaring out from the inside as I do so. So I'm creating a shoulder pattern and a bit of a neck. Once you get to the size you want, you can actually go in and do what's called collaring, which is wrapping damp fingers around the neck or collar of the pot and holding still while you slowly close in those fingers. It's a good way to make especially bottles and small openings. But I want a little more precision, so I'm just using my individual hand. There we go. And then I clean off this little lip a little bit. Now, it's not very flared out yet, but at least I have the basic idea. Now I can take this little rubber rib, of course, same idea, but rubber, and I use it like a squeegee with my fingers on the inside. I can flare my pot where I want. Getting a little more of that shape I wanted. Using my rubber rib to both shape and clean at the same time. I go in and smooth out my lip here, which of course is where you would normally have, well, your flower sticking out, but for me, I also need to keep in mind, if I'm going to make a lid for it later on, it needs to be just at the right angle or have a little step included to allow a lid to sit down on top of it. So there we go. I'll go ahead and smooth this over here at this angle so you can see me doing it. Now this bottom is still a little wider than I want. Not by much, but a little. So I'm going to take this little tool, which is like the wooden rib, except it's long, and I can actually go in and trim a little bit off, just to do a little refining. To finish that silhouette out a little bit. And then last but not least, what this is actually for is, if I were to lay this against the wheel at this angle, it goes up and under the clay and just undercuts just a little bit to create this little shadow here. And that shadow creates a bit of depth and really alters the overall final look of a pot. When it has that, it doesn't look like it's climbing out of the table. It just looks like it's placed there. So I can go in there, make sure I have all of my surfaces smooth, no rough edges. Including down here where I just trimmed. And then last but not least, I take a wire tool, which is exactly what it sounds like. Here we go. Mine always runs away. A wire tool, it is a wire with two little handles, and I wrap it around my hand very much like you would dental floss, and I press down with my thumbs against the top. I just press and pull straight to me in one fluid motion. What that does is, if I have very dry hands, it makes it, this is very soft, normally I would just set mine to the side, but it sliced it right off the bat that I had there. If I wanted, with a little twisting maneuver, I can lift the pot up and set it to the side to let it dry.